The North Vietnamese generals were certain of one thing. America's army would choke on its own supply lines. They called it the paper elephant. But when the first of the steel serpents 2 miles long began to roll, that laughter died in their throats. This is the story of how America's greatest perceived weakness became a blitzkrieg of industrial terror. In a humid, subterranean command bunker, deep in the Tay Ninh jungle, a North Vietnamese general traced the thin red line of South Vietnam's highways and smiled. He explained to his officers that the Americans, for all their technological might, had tethered their entire army to a fragile asphalt leash that could be cut by bloody peace. This was the core of their strategy, a doctrine perfected by General Vo Van decades earlier against the French at Dien Bien Phu. It was the strategy of the patient strangler against a powerful but clumsy giant. This was not mere military doctrine. It was a revolutionary philosophy known as Doutrine, the struggle, which seamlessly blended political action, social mobilization, and armed conflict. Giap's genius was in recognizing that a technologically inferior force could defeat a superpower by refusing to fight on the superpower's terms. They would not engage in set-piece battles where American firepower could annihilate them. Instead, they would fight a war of ghosts and shadows, a war of attrition, not just against soldiers, but against the enemy's national will. At that very same moment, a young army logistics stood on the docks at Cam Ranh Bay. His uniform already soaked with sweat in the oppressive coastal and felt a profound sense of despair. Before him lay not a mountain, but a continent of material, a sprawling, chaotic testament to the full terrifying power of American industry. 1 million tons of cargo sat baking in the sun, stretching for miles in every direction. There were perfectly aligned 55-gallon fuel drums, geometric continents of green ammunition crates, and sprawling cities of cardboard containing everything from Type C rations to spare helicopter rotor blades. This was the output of the arsenal of a republic, an empire of production 12,000 miles across the Pacific. And it was his job to move it inland through a country that had almost no secure roads. The very air hummed with a uniquely American energy, a belief that any problem, no matter how immense, could be solved with enough steel, enough engineering, and enough horsepower. This port, a deep-water harbor that rivaled any in the world, had been nothing but a sandspit just 2 years prior. United States Navy Seabees and Army engineers working in punishing had transformed it into a logistical heart that pumped the lifeblood of war into a nation they were still struggling to understand. The generals in their jungle headquarters believed this logistical tale was a monstrosity, a python that had swallowed a herd of cattle, now sluggish and exposed. Their own logistical was its antithesis, a ghost network of footpaths and bicycle trails known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was a marvel of human endurance, a living artery that defied a bombing campaign more intense than all of the bombs dropped in the Second World War combined. This was no mere footpath. It was a sophisticated 12,000-mile web of roads and waterways, supported by a vast network of underground workshops and fuel depots. Engineers had built pontoon bridges that were sunk below the water surface during the day, to be invisible to reconnaissance aircraft, only to be raised again at night for truck traffic. An army of over 300,000 youth shock brigades, many of them young women, worked tirelessly to repair bomb craters, often filling them in within hours of a B-52 strike. Their strategy against the American convoys was simple: the war of 1,000 cuts. Their intelligence network, built on decades of fighting occupiers, was superb. Every village had eyes and ears reporting on American movements. Reconnaissance teams would patiently observing a stretch of road, noting patrol schedules, response times, and patterns of behavior before designing the perfect ambush. A single command detonated a sniper team, a small sapper squad destroying a bridge. Each was a small wound designed to bleed the giant. They would make the cost of supplying a single inland firebase so astronomically that the American public would eventually demand an end to it. The plan was flawless. The Americans were walking into a trap of their own making. So How could it all go so catastrophically wrong? The answer was born from desperation on the American side. General William Westmoreland's search and destroy doctrine was entirely predicated on establishing a constellation of voracious fire support deep in enemy territory. Without a constant reliable flow of supplies, these bases would be starved, silenced, and ultimately overrun. The environmental challenges alone were a nightmare. During the monsoon season, roads dissolved into rivers of red mud that could swallow a 5-ton truck whole. In the dry season, the laterite dust was a fine abrasive powder air-clogged wore down engine parts and coated everything in a layer of grime. And the heat was a constant causing vehicles to overheat and soldiers to succumb to heat stroke. With every truck a target and every mile an ambush, the fire bases were doomed to starve. The war was on the verge of being lost until a handful of government-issued soldiers with scrap metal and a welding torch invented a weapon no one saw coming. The solution was the United States Army Transportation Corps' Convoy system, a brute force declaration that industrial might would not be defeated by jungle ambushes. They began to improvise, taking standard cargo welding scrap steel plates to the sides, mounting every machine gun they could find. These became the legendary gun trucks. The evolution was rapid and Darwinian. Early models featured a single M60 machine gun and sandbags. When this proved inadequate, crews scavenged armor from wrecked personnel carriers. They mounted twin M250 caliber machine guns, quad 50s, four of the heavy machine guns linked together on a single turret, capable of firing over 2,000 rounds a minute. For a 19-year-old driver from Ohio, the half-inch steel plate welded to his door wasn't just armor. It was the only thing and a rocket-propelled grenade. The 50 caliber roaring wasn't just a weapon. It was his answer to a jungle that wanted to swallow him whole. It was a desperate improvised solution born in the mud and dust of the front lines. But could these homemade monster machines truly stand against the masters of the jungle ambush? This titanic an industrial empire built on a hostile shore is a side of the war rarely seen. If you find this level of historical detail compelling, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. The ground began to tremble at 0500 hours, not from an earthquake or an artillery barrage, but from the synchronized roar of 500 diesel engines. In the pre-dawn gloom of the staging area outside Cong, a convoy 2 miles long was preparing to challenge the 65-mile stretch of Highway 19 to Plato, a road known grimly as Ambush Alley. This was the steel serpent, a creature of immense and terrible power. Its head was composed of a V-formation of gun trucks, their heavy armor plating bristling with machine guns. Behind them, an endless column of 5-ton cargo trucks laden with the lifeblood of the war. The serpent was rolling deep into the viper's nest. For the men inside, the question wasn't if the attack would come, but when. And from where? The tension in the cab of each truck was a physical thing, a metallic taste in the mouth. The young drivers, many barely out of their teens, would grip their steering wheels, knuckles white, eyes scanning the dense triple canopy jungle that seemed to lean over the road, threatening to suffocate. The first sign of an ambush was rarely seen. It was felt. A deafening explosion as a command detonated mine, often a 155 millimeter artillery shell buried in the road erupted directly under a fuel tanker. The world dissolved into a flash of white-hot and a concussive blast that blew the doors off trucks 50 yards away. The tanker, carrying 7,000 gallons of gasoline, was atomized, becoming a raging fire hundreds of feet into the sky, blocking the road with a wall of flame and oily smoke. This was the signal. Immediately, the jungle would erupt in a cacophony of violence. Pre-sighted mortars would rain down on the stalled column. Rocket-propelled grenades with their distinctive, terrifying streak from the tree line aimed at the thin-skinned trucks. A K-47 and machine gun pour in from prepared L-shaped position, creating a deadly, inescapable crossfire. For a few terrifying seconds, the Viet Cong owned the battlefield. But the American response was not one of panic. It was a violent and overwhelming doctrine. The gun trucks, which had been positioned every 10th vehicle in the column, roared to life. A gun truck named Eve of Destruction. Its bed lined with a half-inch of steel, armed with twin 50 caliber machine guns, pivoted its turret toward the main enemy position. Its commander, a staff sergeant on his third tour, calmly gave the order to fire. The sound was not a series of individual shots, but a continuous deafening roar, like a giant tearing a canvas sheet. The twin 50s unleashed a torrent of tracer fire, a solid stream of light that chewed through the jungle, scything down trees 1 foot in diameter, pulverizing termite mounds, and filling the air with a storm of lead. The sheer volume of fire was designed to suppress the attackers, to force them to keep their heads down, and to buy time. The other truck drivers, trained for this moment, would push their accelerators to the floor, driving through the kill zone as fast as they could, often right past the burning wreck of a fellow truck. To stop was to die. Above, a light observation helicopter, a loach that had been circling like a dragonfly, would mark the enemy positions with smoke. And moments later, Cobra gunships would sweep in, their chin-mounted miniguns and rocket pods, a devastating barrage that shattered the ambush. The bravery of these turning simple trucks into mobile fortresses is a testament to battlefield innovation. What are some of the most incredible soldier-made inventions you've heard of in military history? Let us know in the comments below. The fight would often be over in minutes. Medics would rush to the wounded, while combat engineers, often riding with the convoy, would work miracles. A heavy wrecker would push the burning husk of the tanker off the road, while another team filled the mine crater. The column would reform and push on, leaving behind a smoking and a jungle scarred by thousands of bullets. After 8, sometimes 10 agonizing hours, the gates of the fire base would come into view. The arrival of the convoy was a moment of profound relief. The dust-caked trucks, many peppered with shrapnel, were the most beautiful sight in the world. The serpent had shed its skin of ambushes along the highway, but it had delivered its venom thousands of tons of fuel and ammunition to the very tip of the spear. From a hidden observation dug into a hillside several miles away, a seasoned North Vietnamese army watched as the American convoy rolled into the Pleiku fire base. His men had mounted three separate ambushes, destroying seven trucks and killing dozens of Americans. By his standards, it was a success. He expected to see the American base hunker down, rationing supplies. Instead, what he witnessed defied his understanding of the laws of warfare. He had failed to stop the convoy. A tactical loss, but manageable. He had no idea the true nightmare for his forces was only just beginning. The convoy did not simply resupply the base. It transformed. The moment the truck stopped, a perfectly orchestrated ballet of activity began. The base's battery of howitzers, which had been conserving ammunition for weeks, suddenly roared to life, pounding enemy positions around the clock. The commander watched as his entire grid squares were systematically erased by a rolling thunder that never ceased. His units in the field began sending panicked reports. A reserve company, resting in what they thought was a safe haven, was bracketed by artillery and effectively wiped out before they could even move. The fuel trucks pumped their cargo into massive rubber bladders, and the air cavalry troops that began operating at a staggering tempo, with Huey and Cobra helicopters creating a constant lethal aerial presence. The most shocking development was the birth of a completely new fire base. Heavy bulldozers delivered by the convoy rumbled out and began clearing a nearby hilltop. CH-47 Chinook helicopters, now with unlimited fuel, began ferrying sling-loaded artillery and prefabricated bunkers. Within one single day, a patch of jungle was transformed into a fully functional American fire base. It was as if the Americans had moved the very factory of war and reassembled it on his doorstep. The laughter that had once filled his commander's bunker was replaced by the incessant crackle of panicked radio transmissions and the ceaseless thunder of a fully supplied and now utterly unleashed enemy enemy. They hadn't just misjudged the American military's resolve. They had fundamentally misunderstood the very nature of American industrial power. They had cut the serpent, but instead of dying, it had simply grown two new heads. This fundamental shift in strategy prolonged the war for years, and ultimately changed its outcome. If you know someone who is fascinated by military strategy and the unseen forces that decide wars, share this video with them. Back in the subterranean command bunker, deep in the jungle, the same general who had once smiled so confidently now stared at the same map of South Vietnam. The smile was gone, replaced by a deeply weary expression. The thin red lines that represented the American-controlled highways no longer looked like fragile leashes. They looked like the searing tentacles of an industrial monster. Pipelines of mechanical fury reaching deep into the heartland of his Revolutionary War. The reports from the Central Highlands confirmed his worst fears. The convoy system, which they had identified as the enemy's primary weakness, had proven to be its greatest terrestrial strength. Their strategy of 1,000 cuts had failed. The Americans had demonstrated an almost infinite capacity to absorb losses, repair damage, and push through, fueled by a bottomless well of resources from across the sea. The American paper elephant was, in fact, an elephant of solid steel. The convoys of the United States Army Transportation did more than move supplies. They moved the very center of gravity of the war, proving that in a conflict between a disciplined guerrilla army and an industrial superpower, the most devastating weapon is not a rifle, but a spreadsheet, a cargo manifest, and an endless line of 5-ton trucks rolling relentlessly down a contested highway. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the logistics of the Vietnam War. If you want more stories that uncover the hidden engines of history, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. We'll see you in the next one.